10th graders, 7th graders. The idea is that we make this as interactive as possible. The girls have been working for 2 months on a very interesting project, very related, by the way, to what we're doing in 10th grade, all about the power of words, about mass persuasion, and that's why I think you'll find it very interesting, and I'm sure 7th graders the same. We need all your attention. Read science, please. It's a very interesting project that they've done a very good job up to now. So let's welcome that the project is called Behavior Conditions Through Persuasion and Analysis of Adolf Hitler's and Winston Churchill's campaigns during World War II. So we leave you with Maria Alejandra Weaver, Daniela Marquez, and Manuela Gonzalez. Give them a welcome, please.
Good morning, girls. Before we start, we want to tell you that electronic devices cannot be used throughout the presentation, and they are strictly prohibited at school. So thank you. Pay attention. before we start the presentation, we found this quote by Aristotle that says, "Wicked men obey out of fear, good men out of love." And we want to show you that the Germans became the wicked men and the British were the good men.
Well, first of all, we want to clear up some key terms that can be important for the presentation. The first one is conditioning, that is to train or accustom to behave in a certain way. Discourse, that is written or spoken communication or debate.
Critical discourse analysis is analytical research that studies social power, and an ideal is to satisfy someone's conception of what is perfect.
Nationalism are patriotic feelings, principles, or efforts that can also be understood as an extreme form of patriotism marked by a feeling of superiority over other countries. Nazism is an anti-Semite group that rejected Marxism, communism, Bolshevism, and democracy in general. They believed in a sole leader that was the authority of the whole political party, and this leader was strongly linked with fascism.
Persuasion is the action of persuading someone, or being persuaded to do or believe something. Ergo, persuasive is good at persuading someone.
Political psychology is an interdisciplinary academic field which understands politics, politicians, and political behavior from a psychological point of view. Propaganda is biased information or of misleading nature used to promote or publicize a political cause or a political point of view.
Rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the exploitation of figures of speech and other compositional techniques. Swastika is an ancient symbol in the form of an equal arm cross, with each arm continued at a right angle, in clockwise form, as the emblem of the Nazi German Party. And finally, the Tommies were the British soldiers that fought during the Second World War. In order to develop this project, we decided to use two rhetorical analysis techniques. The first one is Aristotle's Ethos, Pathos, and Logos, and we will now read you a quote, which we consider resumes this theory.
Of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are three kinds. The first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker, meaning ethos. The second is putting the audience into a certain frame of mind, pathos. The third on the proof or apparent proof provided by the words of speech itself, logos. Persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible.
Therefore, ethos can also be understood as the credibility a speaker has.
Pathos, the manipulation of feelings in favor of the speaker.
And finally, logos is a proof provided within the speech.
The second rhetorical theory we used are Cicero's 5 canons, which are
Disposal or arrangement, which its name states, is the way the speech is arranged.
Memoria is the ability of memorizing speech. Allocution, the way the speaker presents the argument.
Inventio or invention is the process of developing and refining the arguments.
And finally, actio or delivery, which is the final product of the speech.
Throughout history, men have demonstrated their ability to build and destroy. Empires have rose and fallen, everything thanks to men's will. How have we achieved all this? What makes us different? What gives us the power to change things, to innovate, to survive even if we once were the weakest living creatures on earth?
Our strength is wit. It has given us power and a place in the food chain. We have managed to show several aspects, and we have turned them into deadly weapons. And today, we're facing you with one of the most powerful weapons ever created by man, persuasion.
It may sound innocent to some and dangerous to others, but what we know for sure is that you're going to be surprised of all the power and influence that persuasion may have. When it comes to World War II, it is almost unbelievable the behavior of the European people during the war. We believe that we have a moral that will never fail us, that will never let us commit these horrible acts.
This morale is unconditional, and we think it is part of us, but this can be manipulated. And today we'll show you how these people influence others to think and act in certain ways, whether it was for good or for bad.
Persuasion was used in the Second World War to manipulate masses, to brainwash people into thinking what their leader wanted them to think, to convince people to act and behave a certain way. There have been several researches and studies, however, scholars have never been able to fully understand this war.
What we wanted to do with this project was not to understand the war, but to understand its leaders and the way they manipulated and influenced people. We decided to do this through rhetoric. We chose and analyzed two of the most influential and important leaders of the time, Winston Churchill and Adolf Hitler.
We will first analyze Hitler and then contrast him with Churchill.
Hitler was usually known for his horrendous acts as well as his incredibly persuasive speeches. And he used both of the rhetoric theories we showed you, and he used them very well.
In 1934, Adolf Hitler became president of Germany. He had millions of followers. He was adored, people relied on him, believed in him. He was practically Germany's messiah. But the real question is, how did he become so powerful? And how did he manage to persuade and influence a whole nation?
Hitler used to apply ethos at the beginning of his speech, speaking highly of himself, portraying himself as a superior, an authority. Through political psychology, we were able to understand that applying the ethos in this way is vital, since our conscience is conditioned to follow morals, but it is also conditioned to follow authority.
This kind of statements influence people into believing that they shared something with their idol, in this case, Adolf Hitler. Sharing emotions with this kind of people who are being idolized is dangerous because people will try to end his suffering. And that's why we can see how and why Germans acted this way during the World War II.
We human beings are usually guided by emotions and logic. This is why it is really important to understand how to use pathos and logos in speech. For example, Hitler used pathos to relate to his audience. He said very clearly that he was a German, that he wanted to recover Germany for the Germans, that he understood the Germans' pain because it was his pain as well.
What would you do if you had the evidence to fight against someone? If other countries were belittling your nation? If your whole country was being threatened? Hitler used to apply logos using evidence from World War I, more specifically about the Treaty of Versailles. For instance, this quote: "International finance remained brutal and squeezed our bulk ruthlessly. The steps taken in 1939 served the agents of the right. Everything could have developed quite differently had the outside world had as much as an ounce of understanding for the vital concerns of Germany," was a quote Adolf Hitler used in his famous speech, "Who Wanted the War?" This quote was very useful to persuade the Germans, since it was providing them the evidence to fight against the other nations. They were trying to belittle Germany, and they could not let that happen. In conclusion, applying ethos, pathos, and logos, Hitler was able to relate with his audience, provided with the evidence to fight, and gain their trust.
Hitler did not only use Aristotle's ethos, pathos, and logos, as my friend was saying, but he also used Cicero's 5 canons. For example, he used to memorize his speeches, so he would deliver them in a very confident way. This was by applying memoria. And he also tried to do very persuasive and attractive speeches for the audiences, and this was applied by disclosure.
Hitler was very creative, as it is shown in Mein Kampf. His creativity came in handy when it was necessary to apply invention.
Due to his creativity, Hitler was able to develop strong arguments that were credible for the German folk.
We haven't talked about elocution action, but Hitler used them too. In his speeches, he always used figures of speech, which was very important, and he evoked national pride and anti-Semitic behavior in his audience.
Winston Churchill was born in a rich family in the year 1874. He became Great Britain's Prime Minister in 1940 to 1945, and then again in 1951 to 1955. However, he used to hold important political positions before, such as the Secretary of State of Iran War and the Minister of Munitions, just to name a few.
He was loved by all the British, and when he became Prime Minister, he had a lot of power and influence. Churchill, unlike Hitler, was not born with the gift of rhetoric. He had to work really hard to make a speech, and because of this, he didn't exactly apply all of the 5 canons. However, he was able to persuade thousands of people into fighting against Germany.
How is it possible to convince an entire nation that one single person is the entire root of all evil? In order to persuade his people, Churchill tried to show war as the ultimate battle between good and evil, and of course Germany, or more specifically Hitler, was evil.
Even though Churchill was not a rhetorical genius, he learned quite well. For instance, through the war, he highlighted the importance of British people, how they were necessary to win the war. He used to apply ethics, stating that the government would rely on their people, expecting the people's trust in exchange for his own, and eventually gaining it.
Furthermore, in contrast to Hitler, Churchill did not portray himself as a superior. He portrayed himself as an equal, as a normal British citizen that was just seeking for the safety and for the welfare of his country. Applying pathos, he was able to relate to his audience and show them that they had a common cause. He also repeated a couple of times that he understood the pain that the British were suffering and that it was his pain as well.
To illustrate how Churchill used logos, I will read this next quote. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force, which had already been intervening in the battle so far as its range would allow, from home bases now used part of its main metropolitan fighter strength and struck at the German bombers and at the fighters which in large numbers protected them. This was at the official fight on the beach's speech, which you heard in the video, which was very important. And in here, we can clearly see that he's applying logos because he's supporting all his arguments with proof.
To back up their speeches, both Hitler and Churchill used propaganda. They had their own objectives. For instance, Hitler wanted to infuriate the Germans, evoking hate and using that hatred against the enemy. Dr. Joseph Goebbels was Germany's Minister of Propaganda and Hitler's right hand. One of his first acts was